Greetings from India. You are listening to the Businesstalk podcast. I am Deepak, your host. We are pleased to welcome Dr. Howard Friedman and Akshay Swaminathan as our esteemed guests on today's podcast episode. Before we begin, let me introduce today's guest. Dr. Howard Friedman is a data scientist, health economist, and writer with extensive experience across the private sector, public sector, and academia. He has led analytics teams at Capital One, founded companies in healthcare, finance, telecom, and retail, and advised private equity firms. His public sector work includes major research projects for governments and international organizations, while academically he teaches at Columbia University and has authored over 100 scientific works. Dr. Friedman's books includes Measure of a Nation, A Modest Proposal for America, Ultimate Prize, and Winning with Data Science, published in 2024. Our second guest is Akshay Swaminathan, a current student at MD PhD candidate at Biomedical Data Science at Stanford University, working with Dr. Nigam Shah on deploying and evaluating AI systems in healthcare. He first witnessed the impact of strengthening health systems in Bolivia, where his team at Refresh Bolivia built a clinic that now serves over 10,000 indigenous residents in Cochabamba. At Harvard, he collaborated with Dr. S.V. Subramanian on linking population health indicators to geopolitical units in India and with Dr. Vikram Patel on developing low-cost mental health interventions. He has also worked on methods for analyzing observational oncology data at Flatiron Health and served as head of data science at Celebral, where his team built data-driven tools that expanded access to high-quality mental health care for more than 5 lakh patients across the United States. In this episode, Dr. Howard and Akshay share the core insights from their award-winning book, Winning with Data Science, a handbook for business leaders. It's my pleasure to now welcome Dr. Howard Friedman and Akshay Swaminathan to the conversation. Thank you, Professor Howard and Akshay, for graciously accepting our invitation. We truly appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Deepak.
Thank you. Professor Howard, your book uses the stories of Kamala and Steve to illustrate how business leaders can work with data science teams. What inspired you to take this narrative-driven approach instead of a purely technical one?
Well, the book itself takes the narrative approach, and this is really Akshay's brilliant insight, which is it's more interesting to read narrative stories than to read a standard textbook. And so what we did is we developed these characters and their backstories, and we fleshed that out in advance, and then we started writing the chapters, which weave in their corporate experiences into data science learnings and lessons that can be applicable for people who, whether they're business leaders or data scientists or somewhere in between.
Akshay, many leaders feel overwhelmed by the jargon in data science. From your perspective, what are the top 3 terms every business leader must truly understand and why?
I'll give you just one term, model. Okay, and Howard's laughing because he knows that this one word actually contains dozens of words inside it. It can be, people throw around this word model, it can mean many different things. You can have, for example, a data model, which actually has nothing to do with machine learning or AI. It's simply a schema, a representation of how your data is organized, right? Which is really important. Then you have a regression model, right? Which is a statistical tool that you can use to analyze data. Then you have more advanced machine learning models. Then you have AI models, large language models. Each of these uses of the word model is actually quite different. And so if you as a business leader can understand the differences between the different uses of the word model, one, it'll help you sort out the BS from the real signal. It'll help you figure out when someone knows what they're talking about, when they don't know what they're talking about, because oftentimes people misuse the word in the wrong context. And it'll help you more clearly communicate with your data scientist, because data scientists make this problem all the time when they say the word model, but maybe they actually mean to say something else. And so if you as a business leader can say, hey, when you say model, what do you mean by that? What type of model are you actually talking about? That can be a very productive question.
I just want to add to that. I was
Sure.
smiling because a close family member of mine is actually in fashion. And whenever we're at social events and people ask me, what do I do for a living? I say, oh, I do modeling. And then I get that strange look because perhaps I don't look exactly like a male model. And then I clarify data modeling mostly, sometimes statistical modeling. And they're like, oh. Back to you, Deepak.
Professor, you emphasize collaboration between business managers and data scientists. What are some of the common communication breakdown you have observed, and how can leaders avoid them?
Well, one of the first areas of communication breakdown just comes from the idea we have different definitions in mind. And then I think that was a key message that Akshay was sharing in that example with models. Many of these terms can mean different things to different people. And so just starting with a basic grounding of what do we mean. So agreeing on the terms and definitions is important. And then from there, once we agree on the terms, a lot of the communication is around really understanding what problem is trying to be solved. What is the key question that they're trying to answer? From there, you want people to go ahead and flesh that out. So as we get to the definition, like in that example with models, great, we understand the words we're talking about. What is the business problem we're trying to solve? And then from there, talking about what are some of the solutions that could be done. So that kind of flow seems very logical, but you'll find it often doesn't happen. And I'm working this morning with a client who was struggling with that exact same thing. They had a delivery product that arrived. They thought they were going to get what they expected, but in fact, it doesn't have the usability they need, and it doesn't do the data transformations that are necessary to get value. So now they're going back and they're having to revisit the entire project. That could have been offset at the beginning with tighter communication.
Dr. Howard, a Fortune 500 manager and a newly minted MBA may face very different challenges. How does your book serve both these audiences without oversimplifying or overcomplicating the material?
Well, it's true that they face different problems, right? The CEO, she or he is dealing with broader strategic questions about resource allocation, but they still have to address the question of what is the biggest problem that they're dealing with? What are they willing to spend on it? What are the risks? And what is success? So they're still dealing with that question of success, but at different levels. In the book, we really tease apart this through examples where we have people who are at the middle level, right? They're rising up the corporate ladder. They're dealing with those questions, but what you'll see is there are conversations framed in the book where they're talking to the most senior managers, the people who are driving the business, who have the budgets. And as that conversation happens in the book, you'll see, well, that there are insights. They still have to agree on definitions. They still have to ask good questions. They have to probe for insights, and they have to define success. So either way, if you're a good customer really at the more project level or at the managing the business level, those are still absolutely necessary. Just last week, I was meeting with the former chief risk officer of a Fortune 100 company, and we're talking about different work that he did when he was at the Fortune 100 company and what he's doing now with startup companies. And as he said, it's the same challenges, same questions. He just has less resources and he has more of a motivation with these smaller companies to get solutions that are functional, quick, and don't cost much. So same problems, need for solutions, just a little bit less resources and a little bit less flexibility in terms of timing.
Akshay, what are some early warning signs that a data science project is veering off course, and how can leaders intervene before it becomes a costly failure?
So imagine you're building an LLM powered application for doctors, right? An AI assistant for doctors. To me, the number one warning sign that this project is going off the rails is basically the extent of communication and collaboration between the technical team and the clinical team, the end users. So if you have many, many weeks where the technical team is building on their own without any communication with the clinical team, that's a warning sign to me, because that is a recipe for building a solution that doesn't meet the needs of the end user, right? Technical teams, right, they, as good as they may be, they always need the input and close collaboration of the end user. And without that, right, you risk wasting valuable time and resources on something that ultimately doesn't meet the needs of you. So what we always suggest and what we talk about in the book is embedding someone from that end user team, that stakeholder team, in this case, the doctors, the clinicians, with the technical folks. So having a cross-functional team, right, where it's not just the engineers, it's not just the product manager, but it's also the clinician, the domain expert, the stakeholder. So I think that sort of building in silos, right, is always dangerous.
Akshay, in your view,
Deepak,
please.
yeah, I just wanted to jump into that for a second. So, Akshay, you have experience building apps that are used to support mental health, and you've implemented these. This is not, it's not a theoretical exercise for you. As you were doing that, were there specific steps that you had to take to really make sure that the end user was going to get value from it? So again, this isn't theoretical. This is real world. Just want to get your perspective on that particular project.
100%. And this becomes even more important with AI, and I'll tell you why. So I recently worked on a project where we built an AI co-pilot for India's largest crisis hotline. And the idea is that this AI system would help the counselors respond to patients who text in to this crisis hotline. One of the things you need to keep in mind when you're building an AI powered system is how to evaluate it, right? If we're asking the AI to write messages, right, that eventually patients are going to see, how do we know if those messages are good? This is a very different issue than traditional machine learning, when the model makes a prediction, a yes or a no, and then you can check that prediction based on the data that you observe later on. It's not like that with AI. With AI, the model is generating something that requires a subjective judgment, right? How do you decide whether a message that a model writes is a good message or not? Ultimately, it depends on human judgment. And so the way we do that is we ask a bunch of human experts, what do you think of these messages, or what comprises a good quality message? Turns out that exercise is very challenging because humans disagree. Even even if you convene a group of experts, there's going to be a lot of disagreement. And so we actually just finished this almost 3-4 month exercise where we got together a bunch of expert counselors and asked them, what makes a good message, and we asked them to grade many messages. Turns out if you give 5 expert counselors 50 messages to grade, you're going to get a ton of variability in the scores. And so we had to go through many rounds of conversation and discussion and adjudication to resolve these conflicts in human judgment. There's no engineering involved here. There is no machine learning involved here. This is digging down to the core of human judgment and trying to tease out human subjectivity and make sense of it and create structure from it. So I think that's a really clear example. And by the way, every company that deploys an generative AI solution is going to grapple with this to some extent. So this is just one example of how engineers need to be in such close communication with the end stakeholders.
Dr. Howard, the book highlights the importance of asking the right questions to technical experts. Could you share an example of a bad question versus a good question that business leaders should be aware of?
I want to pick up on these real world examples. So keeping it less theoretical, more practical. And I'm thinking about a generative AI example that was implemented in a company that I support. In their particular case, and full disclosure, this is also, they do a lot of work in India on oncology data. They were dealing with an issue in that the clinicians were spending way too much time writing discharge notes for their patients. And so problem statement was very clear. At the same time, there were going to be limitations on the solution. And so in terms of that question of, well, what is a good solution? What is a bad solution? We had to identify, well, what is the final product? The final product was not going to be an AI generated discharge note that simply went out into the final, documentation. There's still going to be a human in the loop. So what we did is we designed that generative AI to read all the clinical information, draft the discharge note using the format that was standard used, and then we did head-to-head testing of the human-generated discharge note versus a computer-generated discharge note. And we had the human rating, so back to Akshay's points, but we stratified that. We had them rating on completeness, accuracy, whether it provided sufficient information for the patient follow-up. So really just really stratifying it. And then we had it all scaled on these Likert scales. So going from 1 to 7. So we tried to quantify in different dimensions whether it was solving the problem. The question was clearly defined, but the measures of success had to be very clearly established with different dimensions, with a quantification. In the end, in the head-to-head versus the human-generated discharge notes, when we reached the final stage, the generative AI outperformed it. Still, the generative AI required a human being to just scan it. It resulted in a lot of time being saved by the clinician, so they were thrilled. Adaptation was quite easy, but also they felt very confident in the testing process. We had defined success very clearly, and we showed them why we felt this was a successful solution. Without that level of detail, you won't have the trust of the user. They won't accept it, and quite frankly, you won't get the adaptation that you want. So those steps, I think, are necessary in order to ensure you're delivering exactly what you need, and that required a lot of client conversation before we started the project, up until the delivery of the project.
Akshay, many companies are working in healthcare sector by using AI globally and very progressively. In your view, what separate companies that win with data science from those that merely dabble in it?
So a company that, let's take an example of a company that integrates a large language model chatbot as part of their customer service, workflow, right? So maybe they integrate a chatbot on their website to help, customers who land on the website and want to chat. An organization that dabbles in data science or in data, might just throw this chatbot widget on the website and call it a day. One that really wins with data science is trying to leverage data at every step of the decision-making process. So they're not only going to, deploy this chatbot on the website, they're also going to track, right, all of the ways that the users interact with the chatbot. They're maybe going to, use that data and identify, right, and ask the question, right, what are the main concerns that users are asking about with this chatbot? They're going to maybe segment the customers based on those concerns and then create targeted resources based on those customer segments that they observe. Then they might update the chatbot, right? They might fine tune the chatbot to better meet the needs of their customers. So it's about, the ones that really win with data science create a culture around data, a culture around data-driven decision making. And, before they make a decision, they're always asking, is this evidence-based, right? What does the data say?
Dr. Howard, you have written this book at a time when AI tools are advancing rapidly. How do you see the role of business leaders in data-driven decision making evolving over the next 5 years?
I mean, first of all, I think a business leader who's ignoring data is going to be out of a job pretty soon. I just don't see how you're going to run a large company without understanding what's going on in terms of your customers, your sales, your cost of products, all the data related elements it takes. So I think it's absolutely necessary. A question that business leaders have to ask themselves is, what's the level of subject matter expertise they need personally versus what do they need a level of comfort with and they can delegate? And figuring out that balance is a challenge. But I think regardless of industry, you're going to see this more and more. Now, I had started out in the finance industry many decades ago, and it was already very much a data-driven industry. I've been in healthcare for decades, and that is by definition a data-driven industry. There are industries that are maybe slower adapters, but I think there's very few industries that are simply ignoring data. The question is, what's the level of investment? How cutting edge are you going to need to be in order to have a substantial advantage versus your competitors? We're going to see more and more tools being used. The barriers to entries for these tools to be used is getting lower and lower. And as a result, I think you're going to continue to see that demand. So as a business leader, you're going to need some level of fluency in the tools, in the basic concepts, in order to keep pace, in order to maintain profitability. Because the truth is, your competitors are using these tools. So if everyone is getting advantages from it and you're not, you're falling behind. Eventually, you're going to find yourself out of a job. That's really my honest take.
Dr. Howard, what cultural shifts are essential if a company wants to truly integrate data science into its strategy?
Now, cultural changes are tough. They really are. It's easy to tell people, well, take an online course and there you go. I've empowered you to use data science. But that's really checking a box. Cultural changes start from the top all the way down. And when I say start from the top, that means that at the most senior levels, they have to embrace the idea that effective use of data is part of business success. It's not checking a box, it's driving success. And what that means is whether it's from training, whether it's in terms of promotions, whether it's in terms of hiring, the human beings there have to have some level of fluency and comfort with data and data tools. Now, there are many different jobs out there related to data, and we talk about this in the book. Not everyone needs to be a Python programmer, totally unnecessary for many jobs. Not everyone needs to be a specialist on data visualization, but many of these jobs will require some understanding of how to use some tools, and it does rely on human ability to make sure that the results are reasonable. Quite frankly, no matter what tool you're using, no matter what industry, we don't want to see humans closing their eyes and just assuming that the model is always right. In fact, that loop, that human feedback back to the people who are developing the models is absolutely critical, because that's how we improve it. So again, with that culture change, I think it has to start top down. It relates not just to the human beings that are being recruited and trained and promoted, but also to the tools that you're using, the environment that you're working in. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Howard and Akshay, I would like to conclude this episode with one last question. So, two key takeaways from Akshay and two key takeaways from Dr. Howard. If there is one or two, you want every listener, whether or not they ever read a line of code, to remember from your book, what would it be?
I can take a stab, and Howard, please chime in. So the world is changing very fast, but at the same time, it's not changing at all. And what I mean by that is that although there's a lot of hype around AI, it's AI at the end of the day is just another tool. And so the basics of data science and data-driven decision making are as important as ever. If you're an organizational leader, you need to understand, we just launched a product. What is the impact of that product on our business? We just made a decision. What is the impact of that decision on our outcomes? That's A/B testing. That's causal inference. I think that's chapter 8 in our book. You need to understand, when do we need to do a descriptive analysis? When do we need to maybe fit a model to make some associations, do an associational study? Versus when do we need to build a predictive model to predict an outcome, right? So being able to map the problem to the right tool, right? And AI is just another one of those tools in your toolkit. So having that framework for understanding where AI fits within the world of data science and decision science, these are the basics. These are the fundamentals of data that are going to become indispensable, because what's going to happen as we progress is that a lot of leaders are just going to let AI do the thinking for them, or they're going to buy into the hype and launch, just try and embed AI into everything, without being thoughtful about when it's appropriate, when it's not appropriate, when a simpler tool might suffice or even be better. And so, to the extent that you master the fundamentals of data science, you will be better equipped to handle those challenges. And our book really focuses on the fundamentals. In fact, we barely broach the subject of AI, deliberately so, right? Because without a foundation in these core concepts of data science, you have no business thinking about AI.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Howard.
Thank you. You know, as you were mentioning these ideas of, do we have one or two suggestions, take-home messages, I was remembering the old joke where there's three types of statisticians, one that can count and one that can't. So with that said, I'm going to leave you with kind of the takeaways that we had talked about throughout the book itself, which is, what does it take to be a good customer? And good customers have to understand basic terminology. Doesn't mean being a world-class expert, but know some of the basic definitions. Ask good questions about the product, what is being proposed. Challenge assumptions, because your data scientist, she or he is making assumptions about the data, the tools, the products, the customers. And define success. As the customer, make it clear what is success for you, what is failure, so that they know exactly. And as long as you position yourself to be and act like a good customer, you'll have a much better chance of succeeding in your project than if you simply let the ball flow forward and not get as engaged. So, thank you.
Professor Howard and Akshay, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing such practical and insightful perspective from Winning with Data Science book. Your book really demystifies the field and shows business leaders how to work hand in hand with data scientists to create real value. To our listeners, whether you are a new MBA graduate or managing teams at Fortune 500 company, the message is clear. Success with data science isn't about coding or complex maths. It's about asking the right questions, fostering collaboration, and building a culture that embraces data-driven decisions. I highly encourage you to pick up a copy of Winning with Data Science, a handbook for business leaders. It's a resource you will learn to read again and again. Thank you once again, Professor Howard and Akshay, for graciously taking the time to join us today.
Thank you very much for hosting us. We really appreciate it. And thank you so much for all the great questions, Deepak.